Well, here we are, another edition of Closing the Distance, the opportunity we have at Roswell Presbyterian Church to kind of get behind the scenes, unpack a little bit of the message that was presented the day before. And so Jeff Meyers is sharing with us again a new sermon series, which we started last week on prayer and some pretty specific prayers that have been kind of integral, particularly to the Western Church for generations. So tell us a little bit, Jeff, as we get started, about this sermon series and why this sermon series, the need for this sermon series now, and then we'll unpack kind of this prayer from yesterday.
Yeah. So I think, I think Lent as a time of preparation for Easter, as a time of discernment, self-reflection. I like it to be very practical. And, we've done in the past the 7 deadly sins. We've done kind of the steps of the life of Jesus up to the cross. We've done various other fairly practical series. But this year I was like, what have we not done? And then I think maybe Lindsay had mentioned, what about prayers? And I was like, that would be really fun to pick out 7 great prayers of the church that people could use in their own life. They're each very different, praying about different topics in different ways. And I like to feel practices of faith. Like, why do we pray? Does it make a difference? Is it just self-expression? Does it make a difference? If so, how? Is it okay just to complain in prayer? Is it, can we celebrate? All these things. And so I really enjoy it because I learn a lot for myself about my own prayer life and what I'm called to. And I find in thinking about prayer and reflecting on it, it makes me want to pray more.
Nice. Good. So I noticed, kind of as an aside, there's some other things that we've prepared at RPC for Lent that may be new to people. Like I was walking down the hallway underneath the main sanctuary, and there's some pictures on the wall that are kind of prayer stations, and then there's a little labyrinth outside in the portico that's a means of prayer. So in addition to kind of thinking intellectually about these things, there's some more pragmatic or practical, like here's a space you can do prayer, and here's a way, something visual that might help you in your prayer, and all those kind of things, which is, again, fantastic. If we're going to center and focus on prayer during Lent, let's make it open and available to as many people as possible in as many different ways as possible. Because prayer, again, when we think of prayer, we often have this very narrow view. But I mean, what's your view of prayer? Like, what is it? What does it entail? And how can we pray when walking in a labyrinth? How is that different than praying looking at a beautiful image, or the prayer that you talked about yesterday?
I think Thomas Merton says to pray is to pay loving attention. And I think that's a pretty helpful way maybe to think about it, that sometimes loving attention comes out for asking God for things. My friend is sick. Would you heal them? Sometimes it's out of gratitude. Thank you for, the great dinner we had last night, the great vacation we had, whatever. And sometimes it's meditative prayer, where I'm just remaining lovingly attentive to my own breath, my own presence, and God's presence with me. So I think I like that definition because it encompasses a lot of different kinds of prayer. And you mentioned some of the practical tools that we've laid out from the prayer booklet. We have a creative team that kind of comes up with a lot of these ideas and implements them. And then we've got artists who've led the creative arts ministries. So the visual art that's on the main street hall and the prayer labyrinth. I'm not a guy that spent a lot of time in prayer labyrinths over my time, but I find it really interesting and kind of helpful and kind of a good way to shake up something of prayer life that might become run of the mill, too familiar. It's a way to say, oh, I'm going to become more attentive to God's presence, and my own prayers as I walk through this labyrinth. Have you done a lot of labyrinths in your day?
Are you trying to say that I'm old, Jeff? And you were around when someone first invented a labyrinth. Is that the suggestion?
Yeah, you may
I,
not remember. You may be so old you don't remember some of those years.
I have done a few, though. To be honest, I haven't even seen the one outside in the portico at RPC. But yeah, I've seen a few of them in some pretty unique and cool settings. And the first time I saw one, I was like, well, what on earth is this for? But then, as you look at it, and they say, well, the issue, particularly in the Western world, is that we're just in a race to get somewhere, right? And so prayer then is a means to an end. Mm-hmm. And the labyrinth is kind of a reminder that not necessarily. Like, where are you going? Nowhere, mm-hmm. right? But prayer, it's the journey, right? And it's the relationship. And so it's kind of a spatial or visual reminder of, it's not always a means to an end. Again, in our Western thinking, it's often like, okay, I do this and it equals this. And so if we approach prayer like that, sometimes that is prayer, but not all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, yeah, so it is interesting. And I understand, like, it's not anything I go up, it's time for me to do a labyrinth. But if I do take the time to do it, it actually kind of changes your thinking, slows you down a little bit. Because again, you're not, the first time I did one, to be honest, I was like, man, I got to get through this as quick as possible because I got something else to do. Like, kind of defeat the purpose, right?
Yeah, I hope this is a short labyrinth.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man!
Well, wow, I took a wrong turn back there. I got to get out of here quick.
Yeah, exactly. Again, that's that Western mentality that I have.
Yeah.
So not always the healthiest. So yesterday you unpacked the Serenity Prayer. Now, the Serenity Prayer, of all the prayers that we're talking about in this, is probably the most modern or newest prayer. It comes from the mid-20th century, mid-1900s. And it's pretty familiar to people. I mean, you've seen it in posters around the place. Anyone who's had, like you mentioned yesterday, anyone who's had any connection or any familiarity at all with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous or anything like that, this is a prayer. So again, you did a little bit yesterday, but just unpack a little bit more about where this prayer comes from, and then, why it's why you included it in our list of prayers that we're covering over these 7 weeks.
Reinhold Niebuhr, German-American theologian, was a Lutheran pastor in Detroit, worked at Union Seminary, graced the cover of Time magazine in 1950, was a very famous public intellectual, was very concerned about the fallenness and brokenness of the world and how to act ethically in the midst of it. So I love the Serenity Prayer, at least that stanza that we used yesterday, because it helps make us a distinction between problems and dilemmas. Problems that we can solve, dilemmas that we just have to live with. And so in our prayer life, we can say, God, help me to be at work to solve these problems in the world. But then also help me recognize that the world is broken. It's probably not going to be resolved anytime soon. So Lord, how do I learn to live and follow you in the midst of the dilemmas of the world? And I think the Serenity Prayer does a great job analytically in differentiating the two, but also helping us enter in a spiritual way to being uncomfortable, or to be comfortable with uncomfortableness in our lives.
Yeah, that's challenging. Again, considering particularly the time in which he wrote the Serenity Prayer and kind of motivation for his writing. But some people might look at the Serenity Prayer as almost a giving up, like, I'm not sure prayer does anything, so well, help me cope with things that can't change, and I guess if I need to have some courage to do something, then I'm going to do it. But I don't think that was the reason that he wrote the prayer. It wasn't him just kind of giving up on prayer or his faith altogether. So what would you say to people who say it's kind of a giving up or a giving in to the brokenness of the world?
Yeah, Dan, you raise one of the big objections to the prayer that is out there, and one of the criticisms. And I think in that stanza, he offers 3 kind of virtues that you have to cultivate in your life. Serenity, okay? Serenity in the face of things you cannot change, okay? How do I find a sense of peace in the midst of a chaotic world? Courage, okay? This is the virtue that guarantees all others. How do I act courageously? A lot of people, they say, well, it can't be changed. It's not because it can't be changed. It's because they lack the courage to try to change it. You know, the willfulness to take on the powers that be. And third, wisdom or practical wisdom, the wisdom to know the difference. And oftentimes, wisdom we only experience through, we only gain through experience, life experience. And so we have to continue to cultivate wisdom in our lives as we go through it. And hopefully it helps bear out wisdom to differentiate between the times we need serenity and the times we need to have courage. But I think you're absolutely right. That it's just a challenge. And Niebuhr was writing at the time he was writing during World War II.
Right.
He was very critical of the Nazis. He during Vietnam, I think of the Cold War, was very active in those movements, and at a time of great cultural I don't know, I mean, I want to say
Evil.
conflict, and there was a lot going on, and he couldn't control it. So I think that was his time and place, but I think we can take the prayer for our own time and place and make sense of, and it can use it to help it make sense of our lives and how to follow Christ in the midst of complex situations.
But him and his work, he was not someone who wrote this prayer and then was a passive observer to all these things, right? He was, again, that was a thing. He had not given up, and he says, all right, here's something that I disagree with, or here's something that I think needs to be changed, and was willing to stand up to that and had the courage to do that, which again is not then a giving up or a giving in.
Yeah. And he's like a really, like, if you like the Serenity Prayer, I would invite people to go check out maybe Moral Man, Immoral Society, The Nature and Destiny of Man. I mean, he just writes these books with these impressive titles, and his sentence structure and sentences are bold and provocative and pithy. And it's fun to read because it's just like boom, 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 boom. I mean, he's just going along, just like do.
Yeah.
And it's really fun and very interesting. And like Moral Man, Immoral Society, he's saying, I'm put his argument in a nutshell, but he says, humans can hope to act lovingly individually, but societies and groups of people really struggle to act lovingly, and they can only hope to act with justice.
Right.
And be just. And so that's an and it's a big argument. You can go and look, or somebody can go read it and see if they agree or disagree. But I think it's a pretty it's a challenging argument for folks who want societies and governments, let's say, to be creatures of love. And is that even possible? And he would challenge that conception. He would say governments can only do justice. They really can't act with charity. Right. And so, people don't send me emails. Send it to Niebuhr followers somewhere else.
So yesterday in your sermon, you used a personal example, a rather humorous one, to kind of unpack the stages of the Serenity Prayer. But I'm wondering, I mean, we laugh at that and it's humorous, but it probably was not actually a situation where you were praying the Serenity Prayer and felt like it was an application that kind of helped people understand the different stages. But I wonder if you have and are willing to share like a personal, like a more real example of, this was a time in my life where this was a decision, or this was a circumstance that I was in, that the Serenity Prayer became something that helped me through it, or comprehend it, or engage, whatever it was.
I think, one of the, as a pastor, oftentimes, and I'm thinking not recently, but there have been times where I've been thrown into situations as in my role as a pastor, that I felt deeply inadequate, inexperienced, and not qualified to be in, but yet people were looking to me to have something to say, have a word of prayer, a word of comfort. And I was like, this is the last place I want to be on earth. Like,
Right.
I'm
I hear
so
you.
ill prepared, but
Right.
everybody's like, you're the guy who went to seminary, you're the pastor, or you're the one who you say something. I'm like,
Right.
oh no. And I think like that's a time to pray for courage, that
Mm.
and also serenity, that I can't change it. I'm in this situation. I don't have all of the right answers, but hopefully I can say something that brings some comfort and some peace to a situation. And so those are the times I really feel like the serenity prayer has been important for me. I would also say there have been some times where I've had to challenge individuals about things, and I felt like I was in a role. I'm like anybody else. I like to be liked. I want people to like me. So
Right.
I don't like to cause conflict and stuff like that. Um, there's been a few times where I've been called to say, God, give me the courage, to change the things I can. That I'm called, whether it's my role in an organization, in a church, or as a friend, as a human being, that I'm called to go and challenge somebody for one reason or another. And has taken courage, and I've had to use a lot of prayer to do that. And I think it's really helpful to name it, and then I think by asking for courage from God, it helps you temper going overboard, and it's like it helps you find just hopefully the right word to say in the right moment.
Excellent.
Have
Thanks
you
for
have you used the Serenity Prayer in your own prayer life?
Yeah, again, in similar kind of situations, usually, like you said, when I'm feeling like, oh man, am I out of my depth right now?
Yeah, yeah.
That's I think probably most pastors are like, oh dang.
You're
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Particularly like doing hospital chaplaincy and that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, for
yeah,
sure. But in those kind of contexts where there is no simplistic or simple answers, somebody's grieving and you're like, okay, this circumstance is not changing. How can we, help me comfort or whatever? And yeah, it's for sure
oh,
interesting.
it's funny.
Yeah, yeah. So for those, and I probably not anyone who's listening to this podcast or even who were in the sermon yesterday, but there are some who would look at prayer as impractical, as kind of a waste of time, and yet you have started off. When we started last week was with the Lord's Prayer, but then with this prayer is in many ways one of the more pragmatic of prayers, right? It's just kind of okay, let me get down to doing what I need to do, or accepting the things that I need to accept, or and grant me the wisdom. And so for those who would argue that, we talked about a prayer labyrinth, that all of prayer is a labyrinth. You're just kind of mindlessly going in circles and not accomplishing anything. This prayer kind of suggests something completely different.
Yeah, and it really asks. It's an internal prayer, right? It's asking God to work on our heart, our mind, our soul, our will, our emotions, internally to ourselves, and therefore then we become an agent of change in the world, or an agent of serenity in the world.
Right.
Whereas, like the Lord's Prayer, we're asking God, give me my daily bread.
All
Um,
right.
forgive my debts as I forgive my debtors. I mean, it's much more God is kind of intervening outside of me, and I really see the Serenity Prayer as God's working inside my heart to change me so that I can be an agent of action in the world.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
and I think we'll see a similar way in in this prayer that we're going to be studying this Sunday. Uh, Francis of Assisi's Instrument of Peace prayer, which is a fantastic prayer. A lot of people may have read it again before. It's been around a while, attributed to St. Francis, but also about change me so that I can be an impact in the world. which is an interesting way to pray, right? Usually I think I'm asking God for things.
Right.
Get me a date for Friday night. I need a new car. Lord, I've got the sniffles,
Right.
Lord, help my kids start obeying me, and these, like the Serenity Prayer and the Instrument of Peace prayer, are God change me so that I can make an impact in the world, which I think is, a daunting and risky prayer, right?
Yeah. But much more other focused or outward looking than our often normal, in quotes, understanding or view of prayer.
Yeah, like the petitionary, here's my prayer concerns, we're going to go through them.
Right.
Wish list almost. And this is a little different.
Sorry, are you preaching this week? I should know this, but
I am. Yeah,
you are.
It wasn't originally so, but because of scheduling and stuff like that, I am going to preach this Sunday.
So anyone listening this week in preparation to St. Francis, what is it? Where can we find this prayer, or what are some questions that we should be digging into in advance of the sermon?
Yes. So, it's in our prayer booklet that we were handing out after the service. I know we ran out again for the second Sunday.
Oh, did we really? That's great.
Yeah. So you can come and get one on Sunday if you don't already have one. You can Google it and find it. There's various versions of it. So it may not be the exact version that I'm going to use on Sunday, but in general, you get the idea. But I think it's helpful for people, maybe in preparation, to think about the concept of peace. P-E-A-C-E. And how would they define peace? How would other people define peace? How would their neighbors? How would the man on the street define peace? Remember, at Jesus' time, we could read about the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Well, how was that peace achieved? And was it a true peace? And I think that helps us get on the way to understanding and maybe re-understanding what peace is according to what Christ has to say.
Right. And again, jumping the gun a little bit, but the prayer coming up is, make me an instrument of your peace. So it doesn't mean it's bringing peace to me necessarily. It might even bring stress or chaos as I'm an instrument to bring about your peace, which is, again, kind of a convoluted way of thinking about prayer.
Yep. Well, now I'm going to steal that. Maybe hold on while I write that down.
Trying to help you out, Jeff. Well, Jeff,
as the great Dan Kreiss once told me.
I'll get a mention in a quote. That's pretty good.
As the newest author of InterVarsity Press.
Yeah, there we go. Well, good. I appreciate this discussion, Jeff, and looking forward to the continuation of the sermon series. And we're hearing from different pastors. I know mine is coming up in a few weeks. And what other of us are preaching? Is Carrie preaching this?
You and me. Carrie, we bumped out because of some of her other commitments.
All right.
So she'll be this summer. So now, why don't you say a word? Your book just got published. A lot of people don't know about it. We're going to highlight it coming up, but just give us the title, what it's about, so folks can check it out.
Yeah, thanks. Feel very privileged to have published a book called Church for Everyone. And it's basically talking about emerging generations with those under 40 and what we call the multi-inclusive church. So recognizing that unintentionally in most circumstances, we in church communities, because of our own kind of likes and the way that we think things are meant to be in our world, put up walls to people that are different from us. And yet in the emerging generation, those under 40, it's going to be the most diverse generation ever in the history of the Western world, both ethnically, in terms of gender, in terms of roles, in terms of political ideology, and all kinds of things. And so in every other aspect of their lives, they experience this diversity, and yet when they walk through the doors of a worship center, that's very rarely the case. And so they often look with sideways glance at the church and go, I know who this Jesus was and what he encouraged and promoted, and yet why do I not see this reflected in my church? And so it just kind of asks some of those questions and then provides models, examples from different communities all over the world and says, is this something that you and your specific church community could work to become? And we kind of believe that it's one of God's desires for the church, that it become even more inclusive. And I think so. That's what the book's about. It's my wife started reading it last night, and I was like, "Oh, what do you think?" She says, "There's a lot of data in here." It's like, "Yeah, well, it's not a difficult read, but initially in the front end, we're just trying to make a case, and then
Right.
yeah, back a little." But I did hear from a couple people. There's one specific person in the church like, "Oh, this is going to be the new read for my small group," and I'm like, "Oh, well, okay." Hope it goes well. But I'm excited about it. It's
awesome. That's
yeah.
a big deal.
We hope to do a Sunday school class in the fall, open to anyone to just, again, read it together and unpack it and maybe discern what does that mean for RPC and our specific community, and how can we put these things into practice. So yeah, I'm excited.
And where can people pick it up if they're interested?
Online is the easiest place where everyone gets everything, like Amazon or InterVarsity Press. I assume it's in Christian bookstores, but I haven't been to any in the Atlanta area to know. But I mean, InterVarsity is the largest Christian publisher in the world, and so I imagine they've kind of got it out everywhere. But I haven't been to a bookstore to actually see.
Well, if anybody goes to a Christian bookstore and sees it, take a picture, and we'll give you a little
see this. Yeah.
For getting to see Church for Everyone Out in the Wild by Dan Kreiss.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, we're proud of you. Look forward to hope to see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
See you, bud.